Hello everyone and welcome to The Wild Side. This is your host, Dr. Kight, and that was Paul Simon singing The Coast. And before I launch into this week's topic, I want to make a couple of announcements and also send out a personal message. So first of all, I'd like to just start by saying thanks to everyone that showed up to Park Live and was there to listen to, among other things, my talk and all of the great music, of course. It was a lot of fun to get up there in a totally new venue for me, a totally new style of giving a speech. So I had a lot of fun with that, and I'm glad that the weather was so nice, and I hope you guys will all come down for the next few Park Lives that we hold throughout the summer. Second up, I did want to also point out that there are some amazing speakers that are coming into Falmouth this week, and you might just want to have these guys on your radar. So the first is Tony Juniper, who is a conservationist and writer and kind of conservation activist, and he'll be coming to speak to people at the University of Exeter this evening actually, so I apologize for the late notice, but he'll be giving his talk from 6 until 8, talking about what needs to be done to try to help our environment and what sorts of issues we should put first and focus on the most. And then on Thursday, Hugh Pritchard from the Kew Gardens is going to be speaking at the Poly, and Hugh is someone who is an expert in collecting plant samples and creating seed banks and really preserving the seeds and the plants that we have today for the future. So he'll be coming to talk about why that is so important and what sorts of uses those things can have. So that's another thing to keep your eye on if you're interested in that sort of topic. So one last thing I want to say is that I did have some fan requests of topics that I could speak about on the show, and they were some really good requests, and I hope that you keep them coming through the Source Facebook page or through the Wild Side page right off the Source page on the internet. But unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to tackle those quite yet. I've had a very busy week preparing for Park Live and other stuff, and I'm kind of getting back on my feet after all these trips I've been taking lately. So I will come to that soon. It just won't happen this week. But please do keep giving me suggestions, and don't feel bad if I don't get around to them immediately. I will get there eventually. And that brings me to what I will actually be talking about this week, and that is growth and conservation here in the Falmouth area and throughout Cornwall as a whole. And this week I'm going to be talking a little bit about science, but also about kind of more anthropological things and kind of social issues, because conservation really isn't just a science. It's kind of the act of taking scientific research and seeing how that actually fits in with people's real lives. So of course we all want to preserve the habitat and keep it nice, but we have to live here as well, and so we have to find a balance between natural needs and human needs. And that is what I want to talk about. That's why I selected Paul Simon's The Coast to start off the show, because we are here in a coastal habitat, and these are really important areas for conservation, and they're quite a challenge. And actually, the whole reason I want to talk about this particular challenge is that we are doing something up on the University of Exeter campus that is all about quote-unquote grand challenges of the 21st century. So we have this project running for freshman students where they spend 2 weeks here in a couple of weeks at the beginning of June thinking about these grand challenges associated with the modern era and trying to come up with solutions. And I'm working with a group of students that's interested in how to balance growth and conservation in coastal areas just like Falmouth. So trying to kind of provide value and understand the value of the sea and the shore and the people that all live here in the Falmouth area. And I want to talk about kind of the background of that here on the show today, because it is a really important topic for people in the local area to think about, because it does concern them so much, but also because I'm hoping to give you guys an idea of what we're going to be thinking about with the students, so that maybe you can pitch in and give us some suggestions. So everyone that lives in the listening area, you guys are all the ones that actually know what it's like to try to conserve this area and to also live here and to balance out environmental needs with personal needs. And so we'd love to hear from you and get your perspectives and your stories and your experiences, and maybe even interview you during all the films that the students are going to be putting together. Because that is the ultimate goal of this program, is to help them learn about all this stuff and then create little YouTube documentaries that they can use to broadcast what's happening in this area and how other people in other areas might be able to use that and learn from it and make things better there. So to start off with, I want to talk about the first issue, so growth and conservation. First you have to think about what kind of growth is actually happening here, and why is growth, further growth, necessary. And to go way back to the beginning, you kind of can see Cornish growth really starting to take off from about 1871 or so. And since that time, you've had quite a population boom in the Cornish area, and there's been a really steady increase in the number of people. And that's been particularly true since about 1961. And since then, since that 50 years or so, there's been a really dramatic increase in the number of residents here in Cornwall. So now we have just over 500,000 people or so as of the last census. And in fact, this is one of the fastest growing sections of the entire Southwest and also of the entire country. So there are a lot of people that are coming here and trying to find a space to live and jobs, of course. But unfortunately, relative to the rest of the country, the economy here is pretty weak, which most of you probably already know. But there is some good news. It is growing quite rapidly, even though it has kind of started off at a fairly low place. There's a really high level of self-employment here, and lots of people that have really good qualifications. So actually, compared to the rest of the country, there are a huge number of people here that have certain degrees and certain qualifications and certifications, so that they're able to do a lot of specialized techniques and employ themselves in specialized ways. And of course, there's also a lot of seasonal variability because we have so much tourism and so many maritime activities that really kind of drop to a low during the winter. And tourism, of course, is something that's a really big part of the growth that Cornwall has seen, and it's something that's especially tied into the whole conservation issue. The most common form of employment in Cornwall is something in the sector associated with accommodation and food, so things that are catering to the visitors that we have coming into the area. And researchers estimate that Cornwall gets something like 18 million visitors a year, and these people in total bring in nearly £2 billion and provide employment either directly or indirectly for about 61,000 people, and that's about 25% of the employment in the entire county. So even though a lot of us can feel kind of disgruntled about the tourists and their slow driving and clogging up the streets and getting in the way, they actually are really vital to the economy and to keeping Cornwall going in a lot of ways. And of course, a huge proportion of the tourism that comes down here is related to the nature that we have to offer. And if you look out the window today on this beautiful first day of May, it's really obvious why people would want to come down here. It's really incredible. Of course, it does get rainy and windy on some days, but whenever it's nice, it is very, very nice. And indeed, slightly over half of people who come down here say that they've come because of the beauty of the natural landscape. And another third of people who've been surveyed on tourism activities say that they've come because of our beaches. And another 11% kind of have recognized various other outdoorsy activities that they're interested in doing here. So that is a substantial number of people who come to visit here specifically because of what we have to offer outdoors in our habitats. And if you're interested in what's happening specifically right here in Falmouth and Penryn, about 20% of visitors to Cornwall are specifically coming here to our area. And in general, coastal regions like Penryn and Falmouth are the most popular, as you might expect. And a lot of the favorite activities here that can have implications for habitats and for wildlife are things like surfing and hiking, biking, boating, visiting beaches, fishing, all sorts of things like that. And I didn't know this until I was kind of doing some research over the last couple of days, but even within the vicinity of just Falmouth, there are 8 fisheries, and there are many, many more throughout the rest of Cornwall and the Southwest as a whole. And so all of these things are really great for us, and the more of these we have, the better, because it will provide more employment and raise the quality of life. But this can come into kind of contrast with some of the goals that we're trying to achieve in terms of local conservation. And now I have a little bit of background to discuss about the conservation efforts that are going on in Cornwall in general, and also Falmouth in particular. So kind of the most important thing to know about is the Cornwall Biodiversity Initiative, or the CBI. And this is something that was launched in 1996, and it's a voluntary partnership with lots of different individuals and organizations that are all interested in protecting the Cornish wildlife and also enhancing it, so kind of maybe bringing things back up that have been kind of depressed in the past, in terms of making populations larger or making certain habitats look a bit better or be a bit more sustainable over time. And These guys are responsible for the Cornwall Biodiversity Action Plan, or BAP is something else you might have heard it referred to as. And the most recent volume of this plan suggested a big variety of biodiversity projects for the area, and several of these are specifically geared towards protecting the Cornish coastline. So of course that's going to be most interesting to me in my focus here on what do you do along the seashore in terms of balancing conservation and people. And the first of these initiatives is something called All of the Coast. And this is a really broad plan that's interested, as you might expect from the name, at really targeting the entire coastline and joining everything together in one mega plan that kind of addresses everything at once. And specifically, it wants to identify opportunities to link and buffer and expand areas of habitat that are already protected in some way or another, or to find locations that are particularly vulnerable and extend that protection to them. And it's also interested in looking at what conservation projects are already ongoing and then finding where there are gaps and things that need to be addressed so that certain habitats or species don't fall by the wayside. And the overall goal of this plan is to make sure that the shoreline is, and now I'm quoting, ecologically resilient and also quite varied. So people want to conserve and enhance the viability of the species and the habitats in these regions. And really the goal of that is to make sure that the environment is beneficial and healthy now, but also will continue to be those things as climate change continues to change the kind of local habitat and maybe raises temperatures or increases wave activity or whatever other things are going to be happening over the next few years. Now, another project that's important is the Coast to Coast project, and this is interested in creating a network linking the two coasts of Cornwall. So that goes from the Padstow area into Foy, and also, actually I forgot to look up how to pronounce this Cornish word. If it's Foy, I guess it's Loy or Louis, I don't know, I'm so sorry. So connecting all of these valleys. Maybe someone can write in and tell me how I can have the proper Cornish enunciation of that. So anyway, this plan is looking into preserving these incredibly old woodlands in the area, and also particularly paying attention to species that have both national and international importance. And it might not sound very interesting, but this area does have certain lichens and decomposing invertebrates that are very important and quite rare around the rest of the country. And the projects here are interested in linking these multiple important habitats so that you've got species from one coast that can make their way to the other coast unimpeded and be quite healthy, and you can have people who are enjoying the habitat doing so from one side of Cornwall all the way over to the other. And also this project is interested in raising the whole profile of the region, because a lot of people know about the coast but not so much the area in between them. So this is hoping to make that habitat something that would be attractive and interesting to people who maybe haven't ventured inland as much. And finally, the last couple projects are things that are a bit maybe more recognizable as having an impact here in the Falmouth area. And one of these is the Cetacean Project. And of course, if you live around here or have spent much time in this area, you know that Cornwall has lots of opportunities for viewing cetaceans. So things like whales and porpoises and dolphins are really easy to see off the coast. Unfortunately, sometimes we also have strandings like the one that we had recently of the fin whale. And these high stranding rates and also these high viewing rates have made people really interested in using this area to learn from all of the cetaceans that are off of our coast. And in particular, they're focused on 15 key species that need protection. So there's this group of people that are interested in investigating things like bycatch rates, collecting data from all of the strandings that we have so we can try to figure out which species are most impacted and how we might be able to help them and prevent that. And also to test mitigation measures associated with whatever things are negatively affecting these animals. And finally, the last thing on my list here is the Marine Atlas. And this, as of the last time they wrote about it on the web pages, this is a project that's only in its kind of formative stages, and it's something that's on the wish list of things to do, but it's a really cool idea to create a Marine Atlas that's a comprehensive list of all the species and all the habitats that are found in Cornwall's marine areas. And that maybe sounds like kind of a boring thing to do, except that if you don't know what you've got out there, and you don't know kind of what proportion these different things make up of the overall habitat, it's really hard to target them and keep them safe and figure out, what areas can be used and what areas can't be used in a sustainable manner. So they're particularly interested in looking at things like seagrass beds and marl beds and mussel beds, things along the rocky shore, that sort of habitat. And the idea is that you could use this information for education and for awareness and also for the development of management goals. And I'm going to stop there for a moment and cut to a song, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the conservation efforts that are happening right here in Falmouth. And that was Emmylou Harris with Willie Nelson singing Gulf Coast Highway. And back from the break now, I'm ready to dive back into thinking about conservation and growth and how to balance these two things in Cornwall. So just before I played the music, I was talking a little bit about kind of conservation in Cornwall in general, but now I want to specifically mention a few things that are happening here in Falmouth. This is actually something I knew absolutely nothing about until I was reading the Falmouth webpage, which is actually really informative. You guys should all check it out. Even if you live here, there are lots of things on there you might not have known about. And I found out that Falmouth is surrounded by two areas of outstanding national beauty, and of course I'm not just describing them, that actually is a designation, that's a recognized thing around the country. And there are only 41 of these areas across all of England and Wales, so to have two of them flanking Falmouth is really impressive for us. And these are the Foul River area and also the Lizard area. And so in order to kind of recognize that potential and to try to keep it preserved and keep it safe, Falmouth has lots of activities in order to kind of keep the local environment as pristine as we can, but also still function here normally. So for example, there's a Green Tourism Business Scheme, and this recognizes businesses with one of three awards, a bronze, a silver, or a gold. These are earned for activities associated with things like energy and water efficiency, reducing waste, supporting local residents and suppliers, using ethical products, and also making contributions to wildlife. And as a result of these efforts with the Green Tourism Business Scheme, or the GTBS, businesses are contributing a lot to local conservation efforts, and also those that are having an impact on the region and also the country, because of course all these habitats are linked, and so a little local project can actually have big implications for the whole country. And actually you can look for these stores and these businesses if you're interested by looking for a green leaf that signifies they're part of this program, and they've been recognized with these awards. There also, of course, is an increasing emphasis on local products in the shops and in the markets and at festivals, and even if you're just a visitor to this area, you notice that really quickly, that a lot of the restaurants are featuring locally caught stuff, or they're sourcing locally grown food, and it's really amazing. Even since I first showed up here a few years ago, I've noticed more and more of this happening, and it's really great to be able to purchase stuff that is Cornish in origin and not from really far away. And there's also a really large network of public transport opportunities and also walking and cycling paths, including the Southwest Coast Path, which of course goes right through the middle of town. And that might seem like something that's kind of boring and everyday, but in fact having that really nice network allows you to avoid driving and worrying about carbon dioxide, and instead you can just kind of pitch in with everyone else and reduce emissions in that way. So it can be a really big contribution, even though it's something that you just do a little bit every day. So that's kind of the basic background of growth and conservation and why we were interested in both of those and finding a way for those things to fit together here in this region, but also, of course, elsewhere in the country and even in the world. And with our students in this Grand Challenges project that we're going to be doing, we're particularly interested in 9 topics that we've assigned them to, and they're going to look into each of these in more detail. And some of them are kind of scientific and obviously biological and conservation-y. Others are a bit more kind of humanities-based, because they look at the kind of human aspects of what's going on in the town and how can we fit those together with conservation efforts. And I'm going to briefly go through each of these now and kind of give you an idea of the sorts of issues we're interested in and why. And hopefully as you hear about this, you'll think about your own experiences, you'll think about your own viewpoints, and you'll maybe feel inspired to get into contact with us and let us know about that stuff, so we know what's really important here and what's actually happening on the ground, so we can really help the students understand reality and not just some idea that we have of conservation and growth in Cornwall. So first up on the list is the topic, it's actually two topics that kind of fit together in one broad category, which is fisheries in Cornwall and also the seafood industry in general. And of course, kind of the big fish that you think of if you think of Cornwall is pilchards, which were originally one of the biggest species of interest. Fishermen would look for big shoals of these fish from the cliff tops and then direct people in boats to where those big groups were, and then they would use the same method to capture huge hauls of these things. And there used to be an enormous market for pilchards, but then it kind of declined, potentially because a lot of these guys were overfished. But also it is still ongoing, and these are still very popular, especially in Europe. We do sell a lot of the locally caught stuff in France and also in Spain because prices tend to be a bit higher there. And Cornish pilchards, which other people might also know as sardines, are sold there, salted and canned and jarred, and they are still quite popular. And currently the catch is quite diverse, so we've moved on from the pilchards, and we now also provide a lot of fish and a lot of crustaceans. Falmouth Bay scallops are way high on the list of what everyone loves to eat when they come down to visit here. And fishing is a big part of the culture as well. And Cornwall is home to several seafood-related festivals and also some edible marine species conservation groups that recognize the importance of maintaining populations so that they can continue to be fished. So things like the National Lobster Hatchery, for example. And Falmouth in particular is quite important because of its deep harbor, which is the third largest natural deep harbor in the world. And this has brought visits from lots of large ships, and back in the day this began with really big fishing craft, and now of course has expanded to other types of vessels as well. We get lots of cruise boats and military ships and that sort of thing too. But unfortunately, despite the importance of fishing to the local economy, and also you think about the kind of impacts this has on the biology, there is a decline of Cornish fishing, and that's because of European fishing quotas kind of changing the rules of what can be taken. Also depleted stocks, though there have been some recent improvements because a lot of the fishermen have banded together into organizations that can try to address this and make sure that there is more sustainability. And there is also a lot of international competition. So we're hoping that our students can think a little bit about, you know, how can you maintain fisheries and keep fisheries healthy and sustainable, but also make sure that we're providing lots of jobs to people and having that local seafood to attract the tourists and other people who are interested in coming down maybe to fish, for example. The next big category that we've assigned to our students, and actually I'm going to be the one that will be working with them on this topic, is Falmouth as a creative center. And the artistic heritage here in this area goes back to at least the early 19th century, but has been especially prominent since the arrival of the railway, which came here in about 1877, if I'm remembering correctly. And the railway gave everyone access to Cornwall, not just the people that had the nicest horses and carriages that would allow them to access this kind of remote area. And people who had been here already were talking about what a nice quality of light there was in this region, and so the addition of the trains allowed lots of people to come and enjoy that high quality light that we have to offer. And Cornwall has always been a pretty affordable place to live, and it has a wide variety of scenes that could be painted, and always the natural landscape has been a really favorite part of kind of the inspiration of Cornwall to a lot of the artists that come here. And so people, of course, would be drawn to this area that's really beautiful and would give them many things to paint. And important artists that have been here range wildly. So you've got people like J.M.W. Turner and John Singer Sargent that pretty much everyone has heard of, James McNeill Whistler, and also Alfred Wallace. And a lot of these people either lived here for some amount of time or they visited because it had such renown as a great place to do art. And some of the different schools in the area, they were developed here and really nurtured here, include the Newland School, which emphasized a lot of Impressionism and working directly from the subject. So you have a lot of people who are going out into the open air and enjoying the Cornish wildlife and habitat. And also, particularly, they were interested in fishermen and looking at what's happening off the coast and what are these fishermen doing with what species. So again, you can kind of see the connections here between the wildlife and the artwork. You might also have heard about the Lamorna School, which is an offshoot of the Newland School, but was a bit bolder and used more undiluted colors. So the artists like to use the paint directly from the tube and not make it any more kind of, not add white to kind of tone it down a little bit. And this really helped them capture the bright Cornish landscape. So days like today, when you've got a really bright sun and a really blue sky, they did a really great job of kind of capturing how amazing the colors can be in this area. And finally, you might have heard, of course, everyone has heard, of the St. Ives School. And this tended to be more abstract and more modern and have a peak kind of later on historically. The Newlyn and Lamorna schools kind of began just after the artists really started coming here in the later part of the 19th century. And of course, Cornwall is still a haven for artists. And in fact, if you look on the list of all the things that people do here for employment, self-employed artists are at kind of the number 7 spot. So actually, if you look at the list that has 20-some different categories, artwork is in the top half. It is still a very important part of our economy. And this stems from, again, the quality of light here, the romantic landscape that attracts a lot of people, the quality of life, and also that sense of artistic community that has really formed over the past several decades, and actually a couple hundreds of years of people really living here and promoting their artwork. And the creative industries here are thought to contribute about £400 million to the local economy. So it's not just people coming in and enjoying it and creating pieces that are shipped elsewhere. It does actually really make a huge contribution to the money that is earned and kept here in the county. And here in Falmouth, we know that there are lots of great things for artwork. So the Poly was important early on for showcasing photography just as it began to emerge as its own art. So it had a really influential exhibition that helped to kind of showcase this technique and show people what could be done with it, and to provide some of the first examples so they could see what was being made with photography. Also, we have the Falmouth Art Gallery, which is considered one of the best small art galleries in the entire country. And of course, Falmouth University, which attracts lots of artists who work in the performing arts and the fine arts and design. And Falmouth itself has lots of little galleries that you can go into. Penryn now has wonderful galleries as well. So there is a whole lot of art here, and a lot of it, if you go look, kind of showcases the sea and the shore and the people that live in this region. That was James Vincent McMorrow with If I Had a Boat. And next up, I have a lovely segue. I do actually want to talk about boats. So the next topic of this project that we're doing with our students, called Grand Challenges, is food bank versus fancy yachts. And the reason that we're interested in this is that despite the fact that Cornwall does have a very weak economy, there are also very ritzy sides, actually multiple aspects to the county, and that can cause some tensions, especially when these people are using natural habitats in different ways, and different people kind of have different designs for those areas. So as I mentioned earlier, Cornwall does have some serious economic problems. Approximately a third of the population is considered economically inactive, though of course that does also include people like retirees and students, of which we have many. But approximately 5% of all working age people in Cornwall are thought to be unemployed, and the average annual income is just over £22,000, which is lower than the national average. And this kind of juxtaposes quite a bit with kind of the ritzier side of things that we often have with the yachting community, for example, these mega yachts that will occasionally show up. The Royal Cornwall Yacht Club was founded in 1872, and since that time there have been a lot of people who've utilized this area to do all of their boating, to store their boats. The Cornwall Record Office has records associated with over 40 Cornish gentry families. So there is a big presence here of kind of the aristocracy. 3 Michelin-starred restaurants can be found in Cornwall. There are a number of 5-star hotels and other luxury resorts and spas. And as I said, this can really bring a lot of tension to the area, because you've got different people who want to do different things with the land, and some of these people will have a bigger voice than others because of this difference in income and kind of power. And so that can cause a lot of issues, and that's something that we're hoping the students can find out more about. And this is a particularly difficult issue to kind of research, because you can't just type this stuff into the internet and get some feedback from Google. So a lot of this is going to be stuff that we hope people will talk to us about. So in particular, it would be great to hear from you if you have some ideas on this particular topic. The next thing on my list is health in Falmouth. And this was actually really interesting for me to begin to research, because you hear a lot of people talking about the benefits of being by the sea, and you kind of, brush that off as being an old Victorian idea. But in fact, there is a lot of scientific research showing that actually being by the ocean is really good for you. Legitimately, there are studies that back this up. So for example, the negative ions in the sea air supposedly accelerate our ability to absorb oxygen, and they balance out levels of serotonin, which affects your mood and your stress levels. And so spending time by the sea can help you kind of relax and worry less, and also sleep more soundly at night. When you do exercise, like walking and running or even cycling in the sand, it's very beneficial because it makes the exercise more difficult, so your muscles get more out of it. There also is some evidence that just by having your bare feet out walking through the sand or wading through the water, that can cause a feeling of, will cause something called grounding, which psychologically can help you out by making you feel more kind of connected to the earth and more, again, more relaxed. The salty seawater can help clear up your skin, and also just kind of get rid of bacterial infections and clean up any sort of maybe cuts that you've had and kind of help them heal. Exposure to the sun can increase the production of vitamin D, which also again can affect your mood. All of the components of seawater, so all the ions and other vitamins and minerals that are contained in the water, can have lots of beneficial impacts. So for example, magnesium can calm your nerves, potassium can improve your urinary flow. Other things have been suggested, such as curing hay fever and colds and sinus infections, because of the way that it can help kind of work as a decongestant and an antihistamine. And consumption of seaweed is beneficial because of all the minerals found within it. And bathing and soaking with seaweed can draw out toxins and potentially help arthritis. All sorts of things like this. There is actually really good evidence that these things are quite helpful. So next time you feel like taking a day off from work to go to the beach, you can think of it as a sick day. Maybe you're helping yourself feel a bit healthier. So it's really interesting to think about that and think about, how do those things kind of draw in tourists, and what impact does that have on the shore? What impact does that have on our economy or even our lifestyle, because those of us who live here full time are maybe feeling those things all the time, and it might make us feel better and we don't even realize it. Kind of on the opposite side of that spectrum of happiness is a really sad topic of what's happening with the sea, and that's pollution. And there is a real worry about pollution being on the increase, not just locally but in general globally. So around the world, if you look at marine pollution, there are many different pollutants that are threatening our oceans. So things like oil and fertilizers, sewage, toxic chemicals, plastics. We have, unfortunately, quite a lot of experience with this here because of the recent problem we've had with the poor seabirds that have washed up. Scientists think that over 1,000 of them have been affected by the kind of sticky, oily thing that was dumped off of our coast. And so this is a huge problem, and actually that specific example that I just gave is a bit of an oddity, because the bulk of marine pollution does not come from something in the water, like a boat passing by. It actually originates on land. So about 80% of marine pollutants do come from terrestrial environments. And the bulk of this waste was stuff that was generated fairly recently, so within the past 60 years or so. And some researchers have suggested that these pollutants can have a direct impact on our local wildlife, which of course can then affect the whole ecosystem. So bottlenose dolphins, for example, have really suffered, and people think that maybe that's because of the polychlorinated biphenols, or PCBs, that have been dumped in the water. And there are constant fears in shoreline areas of ship groundings and what might happen if a ship does have a hole and starts dumping things into the water. And then there are other types of pollution that are important in this area. So things like air pollution related to traffic and the dust that gets blown off of formerly mined areas, the particulates that are being blown in from the industries in Europe, and even things that you might think of as quite benign, so just sand that has been blown up in the Sahara and then comes across the ocean and makes its way here. So all this stuff together can kind of contribute to kind of problems with our local habitat. And noise pollution is another one. If you've ever listened to the show, you know, of course, I'm interested in that in general. associated with industrial activities and maritime activities like pile driving and boat motors. So all this stuff together can have a real impact on the shore and potentially cause some declines to particular species or habitats that could have serious repercussions not just for the environment, but also for tourism and the economy in general. Kind of going on from that message of what I was saying about the dolphins, another one of the big topics we want to talk about with the students is what's happening with our porpoise populations. Harbor porpoises are one of the smallest mammals in the sea, so they're quite kind of unique and interesting. And here in Cornwall we have a resident pod that's thought to contain something like 8 to 10 individuals, so they are quite hard to census because of where they live, obviously. And they do face a lot of threats. So they are sometimes attacked by bottlenose dolphins, and people don't really know why. They have faced problems with pollution and overfishing. They're often, the overfishing problem is that there are fishermen who take the stuff that the porpoises themselves would eat, but also there's a problem with bycatch because they're often caught in the nets that are being used to catch fish. Also marine noise is a real problem because it makes it difficult for them to communicate. And physical disturbance, like people in their boats, ships getting too close, that sort of thing. And all of this, cumulatively, can cause the animals to leave their feeding areas or feel really stressed, change their migration routes, and just no longer use the Cornish shoreline as home. And there have also been a notable increase in the number of strandings around here, not just in porpoises, but also other cetacean species. And this is a worrying pattern that people are interested in understanding in greater detail. We do have some good news about porpoises. So the Cornwall Wildlife Trust has recently trialed some pingers to try to keep them away from fishing materials, and it looks like actually they do work quite well, and it's not a big hassle for the fishermen to put them out. But unfortunately, they don't have the greatest battery life and they are kind of expensive. So we're working towards figuring out solutions to allow people to use the waters, but also allow the wildlife to be there quite happily as well. Another topic on our list, and I just have one more after this one, is renewable energy. And renewable energy is a really hot topic. You hear this all the time being talked about these days, especially with reference to Cornwall. And that's because Cornwall actually is kind of in a really good position to make huge contributions to this. And that's interesting because actually back in the Industrial Revolution, Cornwall was kind of at the forefront of what was happening, because we had local scientists and innovators who were figuring out how to use that new technology to extract minerals and to utilize and distribute other natural resources. So we've always had kind of a scientific element down here in Cornwall, and we've produced a lot of really important scientific figures. And now we're at the forefront of innovation, but in this time, instead of just using as much as we can from the land and not really bothering with worrying about the future, we're interested in finding techniques that will allow us to sustainably utilize what sources of energy there are here. Renewable sources of energy, of course, are most important because that way you don't have to worry about running out. And the county government has lots of plans associated with things like solar panels and wind turbines and hydropower, so they have lots of suggestions and ways for how we can incorporate these things into our lives and into Cornwall in general. And if you go check out their website, you'll find that they have these maps that show where solar panels are distributed across Cornwall and where there are turbines, which is quite cool because you can see just how much activity there is. And in fact, there was recently a press release from Western Power Distribution saying that we have created so much electricity from solar power that the grid is straining to catch up. So actually we're in this amazing position of having really overproduced renewable energy, and now we have to figure out how to kind of make upgrades and make replacements so that we can get that energy distributed throughout Cornwall, but also to the rest of the country, because we do have so much. Cornwall is also kind of interesting in that it's home to one of only 4 nationally recognized eco-town developments, and that's all about kind of low carbon living, where you integrate lots of different things into one single place. And there are hopes that this model in Cornwall can be rolled out and we can have more of these throughout the country, which will help with kind of green living and sustainability. And recently you might have noticed, if you keep track of what's going on at the Eden Project, that there's a Penzance company called EGS Energy that has plans to make a geothermal plant that will produce both electricity and heat at the Eden Project. And it's one of the first plants like this in the UK, if not the very first plant, to do both of these things simultaneously. So as they roll this out at the Eden Project, you'll be able to go and kind of see the progress and see what's happening and see whether it's successful or not. And if you are really interested in the topic of kind of renewable energies and sustainability, you should check out the Green Cornwall show, which is happening in June 2013 at Heartlands. And it's designed to inform people about kind of the renewable agenda of our county and how people can make use of all the natural resources, but in a way that, you know, it's not going to deplete them within the next couple of decades. It's something that we can keep doing over and over and kind of live in harmony here on the shoreline, using, you know, the waves and the wind and whatever other resources there are available. And finally, the last of our 9 topics that we're going to present to the students is something that actually is maybe not noticeable just yet, but will be more and more, I think, over the next few years, and that's rising sea levels. And this is a huge issue, not just here, but actually all around the world. Over the past 60 years or so, sea levels had been rising on average about 1.7 millimeters per year, which is, you know, nothing that you would notice probably if you just went to the beach every year. But it's accelerated to approximately almost 3 times that over the past couple of decades. So we're having this huge increase in the amount of shoreline that's being reclaimed by the ocean. And this is really caused by 2 things. One is the fact that as we kind of have an increase of global temperature, you've got expansion of the water, and so it's physically just, you know, all the water molecules are taking up more space. And if you think about all the molecules in the ocean, each taking up more space, that's a whole lot of space that they're going to start taking back from the shore. And the other thing is that these increasing temperatures have also melted glaciers, and so we've added water from those as well. And there are estimates that the sea level is going to rise by at least 20 to 60 centimeters, and possibly a lot more, over the remainder of the century. And this is quite important because over half of the world's population lives within 200 kilometers of the shoreline, and in some regions it's a lot higher. So for example, in Asia, there are millions and millions of people that are right next to the shore. So rising sea levels will wipe out human habitats, which is a really important thing, but also increase pollution, alter fisheries, erode the coast, threaten coral reefs, and wipe out wetlands that are really important for filtering water and kind of buffering us from sea storms. And in fact, here in Cornwall, sea storms are a big issue because we are worried about, you know, what will happen if we have more and stronger waves and bigger winds. What happens if we have more and more flooding? Flooding was a big issue. You know, in the last few months we had lots of rains that have closed the roads. And this is particularly problematic along the Fowl River, which is at greatest risk from flooding here along the south coast. All the dramatic weather is going to be problematic as climate change and rising sea levels kind of interact to make things kind of more scary here when the storms do hit. And all of this can affect biodiversity and resource use, and through those things, the economy. So of course there's a lot of interest in combating potential problems by thinking of really smart designs and where we can locate buildings and infrastructure to keep them protected from these potential problems. So these are just the main topics that we're hoping to focus on with our students. We're also kind of hoping to think about broader issues that kind of impact and overarch all of these things. So, for example, the topic of dredging is something that kind of influences and interacts with all of these different topics I've mentioned. But I think this sampling clearly shows that Cornwall has a really rich history and culture and biodiversity, and there are lots of great things to enjoy here, but all of this stuff can create tensions because it's wonderful stuff that we all want access to, and so you've got different groups of people wanting different things, and you've got people in the environment having potentially different interests and things that aren't necessarily mutually beneficial. So we need to be clever to find a good balance, and that's the message that we're trying to get out to our students, and hopefully that is something that you guys can help us out with by sharing your opinions and sharing your perspectives and your experiences so that we can kind of think about what do people feel down here in Falmouth, what do people feel in Cornwall, how does that kind of you know, compare to what the county and the city initiatives are, how does that compare to the national scene, and you know, what do regular people experience and feel about all this stuff. So if you're interested in maybe sharing some thoughts, please do visit the Source FM Facebook page, and drop me a line there, or come to the Wildside page. You can always find info about me, Caitlin Kight, by visiting my own page, which is just myname.com. We would just love to hear from you to get your feedback on these ideas, and what do you think about growth and conservation here in Cornwall, and whether they trade off with each other or not. And on that note, I do want to wrap up for the day and get back to some music so you guys can listen to something other than me talking. But before I duck out, I do just want to remind you that Hugh Pritchard will be at the Poly tomorrow night. He's from the Kew Gardens, talking about saving plants and having seed bank conservation. So you can listen to him if you want, or you can also check out Tony Juniper, who's going to be at the University of Exeter this evening, talking about kind of a more general conservation message. So we do have lots of great speakers coming into Cornwall and Falmouth in particular these days, so keep your eye open for that. And with that, I will leave you to listen to Jesse Mae Hemphill singing "Lord Help the Poor and Needy."